Do you consider yourself an excellent multitasker? Well, then I have some bad news for you. Odds are you probably aren't. In fact, trying to multitask is probably ruining your ability to get stuff done. Hello, friends. I'm your friendly neighborhood Agile alpaca, and today we're going to be discussing multitasking. Before we get started, we should probably define what multitasking means. Typically, we consider it the act of trying to accomplish multiple tasks or projects simultaneously. Now, this doesn't normally look like writing an email while also crafting a presentation on a separate screen at the same exact time. Usually, it's us trying to get multiple projects or tasks to the finish line at the same time and switching back and forth between each of those tasks or projects. So in reality, we're not talking about multitasking. What we're describing here is context switching, which is the act of going back and forth between two different contexts, say a Slack message and some code you're writing, or an email and a presentation. The act of bouncing between these two discrete tasks is where the trouble starts. But before I go on to explain exactly how expensive context switching or multitasking is to you, why don't we play a little game? For this, you're going to need a pen or pencil and some paper, or you can open this in a text document. And I'm going to need you to have a timer ready so that you can time how long it takes you to do this exercise. For the first part of this exercise, I want you to pause this video and then write down the numbers 1 through 20 as quickly as possible. You can write these down on the piece of paper or in separate lines in your text document, whichever is easiest for you. Use a timer to see how long this takes you. And once you have completed the exercise, unpause the video and come back here where we'll move on to step 2. Great, that was nice and easy, and hopefully you didn't find it too hard. Most people tend to complete that in mere seconds, definitely under 30 seconds, and it's a pretty easy task. Okay, for step 2, I'm going to ask you to grab a new piece of paper or a new text document, and we're going to try something a little bit harder. This time, I would like you to write the letters of the alphabet. Same format, go down the page or down the text document, but I want you to list only the consonants, so no vowels. Got it? Okay, pause the video, start your timer, and come back once you've completed this task, and note how long it took you to do. Welcome back. Now, that was probably a little harder than the previous exercise, and maybe it took you a little bit longer to do. I would guess under a minute still, but longer than your previous time. Now, for this third exercise, we're going to make it a little bit harder again. This time, I want you to pause the video with a new sheet of paper or a new text document. And I want you to go down the sheet alternating between numbers and letters. But I want you to only include the odd numbers and every other consonant. For example, you will start with the number 1 and then go to the second consonant from your previous exercise. So when you are ready, pause this video, start your timer, and then write down those alternating numbers and letters in corresponding fashion. We'll see how you did when you unpause and return to this video. Welcome back. If you are like most people, you found that significantly harder to complete, especially compared to the previous 2 tasks. It also probably took you a lot longer to do. Why? Before we start digging into why that last exercise was so much harder and took so much longer to complete, please post the times that you had for each of the 3 exercises in the comments below the video. This will not only help us with engagement so that more people can learn about the true cost of context switching, but it's an interesting data point to see and compare to other people who have done these exercises. Now, when I've run this exercise in the past, most people find that the last exercise, the third one, alternating between numbers and letters, takes anywhere from 5 to 20 times longer than each of the first 2 exercise times combined. It also tends to have more errors as you are switching back and forth between numbers and letters. And if you think about it, you are only delivering half of each of the first 2 exercises. So what is going on here? Well, scientists have studied the notion of multitasking and have discovered that it takes more time to get tasks completed if you switch between them than if you do them one after the other. You also tend to make more errors when you're switching between tasks. Finally, if tasks are more complex, then these time and error penalties increase substantially. Now, there are approximately 2% of the population that are known as super multitaskers who don't incur these penalties, but odds are you're not one of them. In fact, brain scans taken during task switching show a lot of activity in four major areas of our brain. The prefrontal cortex, which is involved in shifting and focusing your attention and selecting which task to do when. The posterior parietal lobe, which activates rules for each task you switch to. The anterior cingulate gyrus, which monitors errors. And the premotor cortex, which is preparing for you to move in some way. All of this brain processing adds a lot of overhead to the tasks themselves. So while each task switch may waste only a tenth of a second, if you do a lot of switching across an entire day, it can add up to a loss of 40% of your total productivity. For example, it takes more than 25 minutes on average to resume a task after you've been interrupted. So if you are in the middle of preparing a presentation or writing some code and you get an important DM in Slack that you need to respond to, going back to the work you were doing previously will now take you 25 minutes longer. This leads to an overall 40% drop in productivity across the board for multitaskers, and it can take up to 50% longer to accomplish a single task. And this introduced waste of task switching or context switching gets worse the more projects or tasks that you are switching between. In a blog post on coding horror from 2006, the author takes a look at quality software management systems thinking by Gerald Weinberg and a graph that was presented that showcases how much this cost can be. If you focus on one project, 100% of your time is dedicated to that project. But using Weinberg's rule of thumb, once you are focusing on two projects, each of those will get about 40% of your time, while 20% will be wasted switching. When you get to three projects, they will each get 20% of your time, with 40% of your overall time spent context switching between the projects, and so on and so forth. There'll be a link to the multitasking myth, the coding horror blog post I'm quoting, in the description of this video, where the author goes even more in depth and links off to some studies and other reports that have been done on these costs of multitasking. So we know that context switching will impact your ability as an individual to get tasks done in the time frame that you would like. But what about for teams and organizations, where multiple teams may be asked to work on multiple projects? Well, the same rules tend to apply here. In this graphic, taken from an InfoQ article called Multitasking Gets You There Later, we see a team of 4 people, Joe, Sue, Srini, and Pat, working on 3 different projects over the course of 20 weeks. Now, due to different skill sets, each member of the team is doing different pieces of the work and then handing them back and forth, and you get this very scattered plot of work time. The end result here is that all 3 projects are completed by the end of week 20. Now let's see what happens if we rearrange the blocks of the project work and have the entire team focus on one project at a time. In this case, we see that Project 1 is completed by the end of week 7, Project 2 by the end of week 13, and Project 3 is still completed by week 20. So while it still took 20 weeks to complete all 3 projects, Projects 1 and 2 are launched earlier. This allows you to deliver to your customers quicker and to start collecting feedback earlier, which overall leads to faster delivery cycle and a better ability to deliver value. But we haven't yet taken into account the actual cost of the context switching that we talked about earlier, that up to 40% or more of time added to each task when you are switching back and forth. In the original fragmented model of these 3 projects, most team members are working on all 3 of them at some point, which introduces handoffs. Every time there's a handoff, there's a context switch, and every member of the team is incurring that cost of context switching. So if Joe is working on Project 1 during weeks 1 and 2, and Sue is working on Project 2 during those same weeks, when week 3 comes along and they swap, they need to learn what the other had done to that point, and there's a cost incurred with that. Alternatively, when they switch back to their previous project, they need to recall where they were in that project, and that is going to introduce more time. Going back to the defragmented model of the team working on one project at a time, when we account for removing the context switching cost for each member of that team, we find that the projects start being delivered earlier. For example, Project 1 may be delivered by week 6, Project 2 by week 11, and Project 3 by week 18. This means that overall, all 3 projects are delivered sooner than if we were trying to run them in parallel. Now, of course, this example operates under the assumption that this is an idealized team, where all four members of the team can work on any aspect of each of the projects. And we know that reality is not normally ideal. Still, the notion stands that by having a team focus together on a singular project, one by one, they will deliver quicker, faster, and more efficiently than having them parallelize the work. These benefits continue to hold true even if it means that one or more workers are idle during the course of a project and are waiting for new work to start. I have another video idea in mind of the cost of idle work versus idle workers, so like and subscribe if you'd be interested in seeing that in the future. At this point, it is important to recognize that focusing on one task at a time can be more difficult for some than for others, especially those that are neurodivergent. So while someone with ADHD, for example, may feel that they are more productive task switching on a regular basis, studies have shown they are no better or worse multitaskers than anyone else, and they would still get the same benefits out of focusing on one item at a time. It would just be a lot more difficult. It is also very important to acknowledge that in many companies today, where priorities are competing with one another all of the time, it can be very difficult to convince your stakeholders, your managers, or your executives that focusing on one project at a time will be more efficient, more effective, and faster than trying to do them all simultaneously. I will include some additional resources and links in the video description that detail more about how context switching and multitasking can impact your ability and your team's ability to deliver products and projects effectively. Feel free to use these as you need to make the case that focusing on one project at a time would be beneficial not just for you or your team, but for the company and your customers as a whole. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've learned something interesting or new. Please let me know in the comments below if there's something you think I missed or got wrong. Like and subscribe for future content, and I hope to see you soon.